Okay. Advise members now that we are in public session and the committee will be broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And members of the public are of course welcome to join. At this stage we're joined online by Sinead McLaughlin and Padraig Delargy. Both can hear me okay?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. And Sinead, you're still all good?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Apologies we have from Gary Middleton and from Kate Nicholl. Declarations of interest, members, if any? None. Okay. Item 3 then is Chairperson's business. So you'll have seen a note that was circulated yesterday in relation to a meeting I undertook with the utility regulator. I just want to flag to members, and you'll see the note in the file on that the utility regulator was pretty clear from his perspective that he doesn't see the legislative competency in relation that currently exists in relation to compensation for customers who were impacted by the recent storm. The utility regulator outlined from his perspective 3 current options that exist. One is a payment from Northern NIE, which to date has not been forthcoming, and that would be a voluntary one. 2 would be an executive support scheme, which again, given the budgetary constraints, doesn't seem to be a viable option. And the third option would have been a legislative change by the department, but any legislation would not, in his view, be able to be retrospective. So I think it's just important that we record the fact that currently no mechanisms exist for customers to be able to pursue compensation. The only slight issue is that in the absence of a Ombudsman in relation to this issue, the utility regulator will now be the adjudicator in relation to any complaints that are made in relation to service. So obviously there's an exemption for electricity companies for storm damage, but that doesn't stop customers making complaints. So at this stage, Peter, was it around 18,000?
That's what they say.
Have been made. So usually they would receive between 8 to 10. So for them to work through 18,000 will obviously be a huge burden. The only slight caveat that they put on that is as they are the adjudicator, they are required, should a claim for compensation be unsuccessful, which given the exemption is very likely, that those making the compensation claim will have costs awarded against them. So if someone is to make a complaint, one of our constituents, it's likely that they would not be upheld in their compensation claim given the exemptions for storm damage, but probably more worryingly for our constituents that they could have costs awarded against them for around £200 to £300. I do think at some stage it'll be useful to hear from the department, because the political line continues to be the compensation is the view of the department, but I struggle to see how that's going to be ascertained. Any members want to comment anything on that at this stage? No? Okay. Draft minutes then, members, at page 7 of our packs, or from our deliberations on the 26th of February. Are members content that that's a true and accurate reflection?
Yeah.
Okay. Any matters arising, members, that members wish to raise at this stage, if not covered in the agenda later? No? Okay, well then we'll move to our first oral session, which is the representatives from Free the Night and the Nighttime Economy. Okay. Boyd, how are you?
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi, Holly.
Hi.
So we're delighted to be joined this morning by Boyd Slater and Holly Lester from Free the Night. Members who aren't aware of the organisation, there are notes within our pack at page 26, page 35, 49 and 59. I'm particularly delighted to welcome you both here today, and very happy to hand over to you to provide some evidence to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. My name's Holly Lester. I am a DJ, record label runner and music producer. I'm also the co-founder of Free the Night alongside Boyd Slater, who has worked on human rights issues in Northern Ireland for over a decade and was also previously a DJ and promoter in his formative years. Free the Night was established in early 2021 to champion a more diverse and forward-thinking nightlife environment for Northern Ireland. We work with a broad range of stakeholders, from artists and venue owners to councils and government departments. We also sit on stakeholder groups such as the Purple Flag Steering Group with the Bids and the Belfast Regional Music Board, and we're engaged in a number of projects at the moment. I'll be travelling to the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2 weeks to be part of a roundtable for an exhibition on nightlife, And we also won the Global Save the Night Fund by Jägermeister, where we'll be creating a documentary and a piece of anthropological research on the importance of dance floors in a post-conflict society. In 2022, we released our first research paper with PhD candidate Ciara Power, who unfortunately cannot join us today. It contained 13 recommendations on how to transform nightlife in Northern Ireland for government and stakeholders. In this report, we highlighted issues like licensing reform, the need for better transport, and the importance of diverse cultural offerings. Our work has taken us as far as Montreal, where we've shared our approach to how cities can operate after dark, with a focus on community and culture. Our global connections help us to stay on top of best practices, which we want to tailor for Northern Ireland's needs. At the end of 2024, we launched the After Dark Alliance, which currently has 36 representatives from across the UK and Ireland, including the Greater London Authority, Greater Manchester Authority, Bristol City Council, Derry, and the Nighttime Advisors for the Republic of Ireland. The purpose of the Alliance is to learn from each other, share resources, and work together to make the places we live better for everyone after dark. Our research and engagement consistently shows that nightlife is culture and provides an important space for building communities. This is clear from the views of our survey respondents, who believe that nightlife has the power to rebuild and transform communities and bring people and communities together.
I would like to speak a little about a joined-up approach, and there is a need for a cross-departmental nighttime task force to support the nighttime economy. While we have had positive conversations with civil servants about cross-departmental working, and during the pandemic we were able to present to a cross-departmental group of civil servants, no department has explicitly taken the lead on this important part of society and the social well-being of our citizens. We propose that the Department of Economy leads, supported by the Department of Communities and Infrastructure. This task force must take a holistic approach and bring in local councils, transport, both public and private, the bids, PSNI, and importantly the arts and cultural sector, to innovate and support our creative communities after dark, and as an extension, grow a sustainable and culturally vibrant nighttime economy. Today we will focus on 3 areas in which we believe the committee and an independent task force could help. These are support for late night transport, licensing reform, and piloting for nighttime economy initiatives. Before we do that, violence against women and girls strategies, combating creative drain, workers' rights, safety at night, responsible consumption, supporting inclusive cultural offerings, making sure students have something to do, and most importantly, building trust in our citizens that the nighttime can be a place for everyone is the responsibility of all departments. And we would expect to see engagement not just from the Department of Economy and Infrastructure, but also from communities, justice, health, education and finance. I would also like to point out that a lot of what we are asking for today helps retain our creatives and give them opportunities. We coined the term creative drain. Just like those who are university graduates who leave for opportunity and a richer cultural life and would be considered brain drain, our creatives do the same for very much the same reasons, but at a much higher rate. Holly carries out training in the arts with young people. We see projects aimed at young people in the arts, including DJ and music production courses that are funded by the likes of Peace Plus. And yet once those young people get to adulthood and then want to develop their music, their artistic talent further, they are given the impression that their talent is not of merit and that Northern Ireland isn't a place that sees value in developing grassroots artists, curators or vibrant cultural tapestry in our cities after dark. Both Holly and I moved to Manchester and Liverpool when we were in our early 20s, and in both cases it was to find more cultural offerings and immerse ourselves in a strong music community. When both of us moved back, we initially hadn't intended to stay at home for long, but we both love this little place and we both wanted to be able to live here and make a life here that is culturally rich. Unfortunately, our culture and creatives and curators who drive innovation after dark have been historically undervalued right across the UK and Ireland. As we have said before, nightlife is culture. The task force should make an effort to understand this and oversee policy piloting schemes and long-term strategies which support local creative communities and make our cities accessible, affordable, safe and exciting places for everybody to live, visit or study in.
Philip Brett raised the critical need for late night transport a few weeks ago in an adjournment debate in the Assembly, and the discussion generated a positive and unanimous response across all parties. As it stands, Northern Ireland is the only capital city in these islands, and we believe in Europe, without a dedicated late night transport system. This is a huge problem, not only for public safety, but also for our late night venues and events, with many business owners and promoters openly speaking of how footfall and ticket sales are being impacted by a lack of public transport, worsened by a lack of taxi drivers since the pandemic. On the 21st of February, an in-depth independent review of our current alcohol licensing system was published. It reported that a number of focus group participants felt that the lack of reliable access to transport made going out at night not only inconvenient, but potentially dangerous, forcing people to wait for long periods of time alone, walk home, or paying for informal lifts from unlicensed drivers. As a result, participants reported going out and coming home earlier in order to have a better chance of catching a taxi. Late night transport builds confidence in our nighttime economy, and we've seen how successful the night movers service can be. However, to grow that success and make our cities welcoming and safer after dark, the service needs funding. We would ask the committee to support the provision of a late night transport service. Our cities don't close until 3 a.m. and workers can be on premises until 4 a.m. or later. A late night service that only runs until 1 a.m. is just not sufficient for a modern capital city. An interdepartmental task force could go some way in thinking about how the service could be funded and what the need is. One model we have suggested to TransLink in past meetings is a levy on ticketing companies which isn't passed on to the customer.
I'm then going to talk a little bit about our current system, our current licensing system, and the issues it creates, as well as some of the recommendations and points made by the licensing review. Right now, our licensing framework stifles diversity. We see too few options for late night culture beyond pubs and alcohol-centric venues, and many licenses that have been lost to off-sales and shops, which was highlighted in the review as a concern. Our own research shows that while people still want the choice of having a drink out on a night out, most people going to a gig, comedy night, or a dance floor focused event do not see alcohol as a key factor in their night out. Similarly, the official review found that on-trade venues had a much smaller impact on public health than off-sales, and stated that pub licences being transferred to off-sales should stop. Only a matter of days ago, while on a panel, Holly was asked by an audience member why there was no diversity of music culture in an ever more ethnically diverse Belfast. Another audience member asked why we have so few spaces that are built, staffed for the purpose of allowing late night culture to thrive. We only had one solid answer, which is that currently it's next to impossible for people with a vision for new cultural spaces to enter the market due to the costs and objections from other venue owners. The diversity of ownership is shocking. Not only is there an issue with those from low or middle income backgrounds being able to create new cultural venues at night, but our evidence gathering would suggest that only a handful of pub licences are owned and operated by anyone under the age of 35 or from an LGBT community, and there may be no pub licences owned and operated in the hands of those from ethnic minority backgrounds. In order to have a diverse offering, we must see diversity of ownership. We have always done well in terms of our pub culture. We have some amazing pubs across Northern Ireland, some offering live music and a space for community to socialise. But the landscape is changing and people want more. The review said that compared to many parts of Great Britain, there is a lack of diversity in terms of venue types across Northern Ireland, such as nightclubs, music venues, cocktail bars and micropubs. The review suggested an introduction of a cultural licensing category and changes to the occasional licensing system to encourage diverse offerings and innovation. This must be moved forward with, even if the wider conversation over the surrender principle needs to continue. We believe that even if the recommendation of a Northern Ireland licensing authority can't be established soon, that movement is made to move forward with cultural and temporary licences immediately. If we're to retain local talent and entrepreneurs, the licensing laws must catch up with modern realities.
To do this, we suggest the interdepartmental task force could pilot certain initiatives, for example, occasional licences, cultural licences, and opening hours that reflect those in Europe and the rest of the UK. If we trial extended opening hours in a few carefully selected areas, we can gather real data on how this impacts businesses, public safety, and community wellbeing. It's a practical way to inform permanent legislative changes down the line. Cities like Montreal have tested 24-hour events and found minimal negatives and plenty of upsides. By working closely with the departments, councils, and law enforcement, we can ensure these pilot schemes are safe, measured, and invaluable for shaping the future of Northern Ireland's nighttime economy. To wrap up, we see a genuine opportunity for Northern Ireland to develop a nighttime economy which can showcase our creativity, welcome tourists, support workers, and ensure that everyone feels safe in our cities after dark. Now we need immediate improvements in late night transport, implementation of licensing recommendations, and a commitment to piloting new ideas. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, and any ideas on how we can push this forward together.
Thank you so much for that really useful presentation. In deference to my colleague Sinead McLaughlin, who ensured that you were on the agenda for today, and rightly so, I'm gonna go to you first, Sinead.
Okay, thank you very much, Boyd and Holly, for coming along today. And I'm sorry I'm just not there in person. And look, I think it's really interesting, and thank you for the briefing today. And I think you've demonstrated so well how all of the departments, or many of the departments, actually face into this issue of the nighttime economy, not just the department for the economy. And I suppose some of the issues that you actually raised are really outside of our remit in terms of infrastructure and communities obviously with the licence, and infrastructure with the transport, but they all come together when we're trying to drive the nighttime economy. And I think it's really important that we pull together and we work together in order to drive it, because, you know, if we don't have a vibrant nighttime economy, our city centres really just die, and they're not attractive for tourists to come, and we all know the value of arts and culture as well. And I've spoken to many arts and culture venues in my city that feel exactly as you have articulated, that it's not a warm and welcoming place for arts and culture. They're squeezed out, and they have to. Even yesterday, we celebrate 30 years of the UK Lottery Fund, and really the UK Lottery Fund is absolutely upholding and supporting our arts and culture. And without them, some of our venues would actually have disappeared off our space. And it's only when they're not there that we actually begin to value their contribution to it. So I suppose, as I say about the licensing, it's not in our agenda, but it is really important. And the one in, one out system doesn't seem to be working, because if it's one out, it's going to groceries, it's going to off licenses. So what is your desire there in order to have vibrancy and newcomers into our city centres, new businesses coming in, and giving that alternative and diversity even within the licensing sector?
Well, there's a good example that just happened quite recently in London, where a very small venue, 150 size capacity, was given temporary licenses for about a year to see how a project would run. After that year, they were then given a full license to be able to run it, and it's now become a very vibrant, locally driven arts venue. And when you look at somewhere like Belfast and even Derry and other cities, we see a lot of dereliction. And the arts community in other cities have managed to transform areas, sometimes to the detriment of those areas in a way. You know, what we saw in Manchester when I first moved there in 2003 was the arts community really, making the likes of Ancoats and Oldham Street, which was a very run-down area of Manchester. They brought new life into it. Unfortunately, those areas have now become gentrified, and those artists have had to move out of it. We're in a position, I think, in Northern Ireland, Belfast and Derry, where we're at the very start of those conversations, and we can make these places, affordable for artists and citizens to live and stay in, and I think that's very important to us. But changing some of those little bits of rules around the likes of occasional licensing will allow for many sort of young curators and promoters to have an option to do something themselves, and potentially then think about, okay, can this be a business for me in the future, and should I have go to have a cultural license which is permanent, and I can operate a business with it. At the minute, what we're finding is that our curators and our people from our arts sector are just moving away. I mean, again, on the panel that Holly was on the other night, there were two young lads on it who run events in Belfast, and they were talking about their friends saying they've just started a venue in another city in the UK, and they're both in their 20s. That doesn't happen in Northern Ireland. There's nobody that we have come across in their 20s that currently owns a venue. And, we do, as we said, we have a very viable and vibrant pub culture. And we don't want to, put them down in any way, but the simple fact is that a vast majority of them are owned by people who are over the age of 50 and maybe don't have a connection to the culture and community and the things that are going on. So, I stress that point that the diversity of culture and activities also depends on the diversity of ownership of those spaces and understanding what the needs are.
Well, you mentioned obviously the two cities, Belfast and Derry, but it's also vital for our rural communities. And we had Hospitality Ulster recently given briefing in the committee, and they talked about pubs closing down, and really they are community hubs as opposed to just pubs closing down in villages and towns right around Northern Ireland, and that's really, really difficult because again that's a venue. A venue lost for arts and culture as well. How would you see that there would be different responses to this, from the task force, different responses or different measures needed for places other than the urban centres?
Yes, 100%. So, even when you go just slightly outside of Belfast into Dundonald, we saw the last pub there really, well, I say the last pub, but the last community pub move over to be owned by Lidl now, where they will be starting a pub. That means that there's no other pubs currently in Dundonald. Similarly, we saw a case where we thought a local music venue in Whitehead was going to have their license sold off to an off license, and that would have then removed that sort of cultural space. Luckily, that didn't happen, and we see a very vibrant sort of community hub there in Whitehead in that space, and that's actually seems to be something that we're also seeing throughout the rest of the UK. So just outside Manchester in Todmorden, there's a venue called the Golden Lion that has become very well renowned because people who were artists and curators in Manchester couldn't afford to live there anymore, and therefore moved out into these more rural locations and decided to start community pubs and music venues in those spaces. And just to point out, something that we talk about quite a bit is that there was an article in the Belfast Telegraph around about 6 or 8 months ago, which was to do with people meeting at a Rolling Stones gig and how they had continued on, got married, and now live lives happily together with children. That Rolling Stones gig took place in Ballymena in a 1,200 capacity venue. Now, when we think of that, we think Ballymena had a 1,200 capacity venue, but yes, it did. And people went out there and they enjoyed culture there and they came together and they now have families together. And similarly, we do the same thing. The vast majority of my friends, and I'm now into my 40s, I grew up and I met on dance floors. And it's a beautiful thing, I think, to find those people in those spaces that are very inclusive, which are culturally rich, which are diverse, and allows you to build social capital. And I think it's very, very important in a post-conflict society.
And just what other cities, you mentioned Manchester there, what other cities in the UK or Ireland do you think is doing this really well and that we could look to as best practice models?
Well, it is an interesting one. At the minute, we would probably point to Bristol being one of the best examples, but cities like Bristol and Manchester I've had for many years, have had quite liberal-leaning councils. So, back in Manchester's heyday, when places like the Hacienda were seen as, hotspots for crime and stuff, Manchester City Council was actually pushing to keep that space open because it was bringing people into the city. Bristol, similarly, has always had a very strong and vibrant nighttime culture. Lots of music has come from there, and so there's already an acceptance that music is culture and that these nighttime venues are culturally viable. So Bristol would probably be a best example, but we have to understand that Northern Ireland, Belfast, Derry, they have their own specific needs, and that's what we should be thinking about. What are those needs? And in the first instance, it really is like us being here today actually helps bring relevance and the importance to these spaces. So, as I said, Bristol is a good example, but there are good examples from right across the UK and Ireland. And the Alliance After Dark, which we formed just before Christmas, is really to try and help us as well learn from all of those experiences right across the UK and Ireland. Look at what the government in the south are doing at the minute, because they've really thought about supporting this and creating those advisors in those different areas. And for us, it's always a learning experience. We went to Montreal, we learned an awful lot from that, and we brought it back and we put it into our report and our research. We speak often to the likes of the Greater London Authority, to Bristol, to people in Manchester, to the West Midlands, always looking to see what they're doing and what's working for them. So, for example, at the next ADA meeting that we hold online, we are going to have 2 talks by the Music Venues Trust and by the Bristol Music Fund. Both of those are currently looking at levying ticketing companies. And although Belfast City Council has also already thought about, how can we create a music fund, we're asking for people to take a little bit of a step back and think about what the need is. Belfast is currently, it's not like we're trying to save music venues. We actually need more music venues. But more importantly, we actually need a way to get people to those music venues. So we're in Bristol, with the Music Venues Trust, they might be thinking about, okay, how can we gather that money to help our venues? Here we're thinking more so about, well, how can that money maybe be put into public transport and help us get citizens into our town and back out of it safely? We see this as one of the key issues that our membership talk about, the general the citizens of Northern Ireland talk about regularly, that transport is a key concern. And I think ticking that off is one of the first boxes in terms of what we need to fund and what we need to support. That should be a priority, really. The idea of changing the licensing, that should help new entrepreneurs to come into the market. At the minute, the $100,000 sort of price to be able to enter the market is just not going to work for people. But those changes would, and a good public transport service really helps build consumer confidence, and that's really needed at the minute. We really need to build that consumer confidence, and public transport's one way to do that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, but I mean, it is totally, it's cross-departmental, and it probably needs a cross-departmental response and a task force in order to head that up, and it's whose responsibility it is. But I do think, the nighttime economy is such an important piece of the overall economy for all of us here in Northern Ireland, and we could do so much more and so much better by just working together on it. And a lot of our cities and councils are doing really good work, and we're a blue flag city for our nighttime or purple flag, sorry, for our nighttime economy as well, and that's really important, which brings all of those stakeholders in together. But I think from departmental led, it would be more effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sinead, firstly, thank you to both of you for coming along here today. Secondly, thank you for freely giving of your time to try and improve, particularly Belfast, but across Northern Ireland, our cultural vibrancy. I'm a massive supporter of the nighttime economy. I think it's so important to bring people together, and I really enjoy the point that you're making in relation to alcohol is obviously an important focus, but for many people it's not the sole and only focus, and sometimes the focus of government is the only people who enjoy nighttime economy or nightlife as those who want to go to a bar, and listen, I'm one of those people, but I also like to do other things at night time too. So firstly, thank you for the work that you've done. Congratulations on the Purple Flag Award again. I think it's really, really important. First issue, just in relation to late night transport, which I'm a huge supporter of, not just in Belfast, but for our colleagues in Derry, Londonderry, and our colleagues in Fermanagh and if we can quite make it to there.
You can't get a daytime bus.
Get a 9 o'clock bus in the morning.
I actually think it's a really, really easy win. So £600,000 to do a year-round service at weekends is not a huge amount of money at all. I've been in ongoing discussions with the Department for Infrastructure in relation to this. The Minister's view is others should contribute, but I think it'd be, it's not a big issue. It's not difficult to get £600,000. On an annual spend of 18.6 billion by the Northern Ireland Executive, it's not. So I think that's a really, really easy win, and I think it's something that all parties are very, very keen to take forward. I'm keen just to pick up on a couple of things. Have you not seen, though, a bit of a change in the nighttime economy, particularly and more spaces, particularly in Belfast? So I'm just thinking through my head in terms of some of the great spaces now that even Belfast City Council so their involvement with Belfast Telegraph building, their recent purchase of the former Tesco's building. There's a much more young person's name for it now, the space. I'm not quite sure what they call it, but how do we better utilise public assets that we already have? There's a great organisation, North Belfast Heritage Cluster, who, under the stewardship of Shane, in terms of Carlisle Memorial Church, we've seen the success of Crumlin Road jail, but how do we make more use for publicly owned spaces?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things that we've been looking into is the Developers Fund.
Yes.
So we did a Freedom of Information request with Belfast City Council to figure out about that Developers Fund, and there's about £1.2 million sitting on it. And we were also told that there are 5 buildings within the Belfast improvement districts which are either owned by City Council or the Department of Communities that are lying empty. Yeah. There is a need really to think about culture and not think about its commercial benefit. Yes. Culture is always viable and relevant. It doesn't always have to be commercially viable, and that's why in some respect we think that the City Councils should be thinking about, well, is there a development fund? Is there money that's available there? And can we create cultural spaces? The likes of the Telegraph building is a good example. However, it is from what we know, there's a number of promoters who will use that space, and it's obviously a huge space, and you would need to have a lot of money to put on an event in there. We're thinking that there needs to be more spaces between the sizes of 2 to 500 in capacity. And yes, City Council could help with that, and the likes of 2 Royal Avenue is a great building. It's maybe not set up quite right to have as a music venue, but there's no reason why something like the Vibrant project that was put in place by Belfast City Council couldn't be used by young curators that want to put something on. When Belfast City Council approached us to ask us, well, why is it that we're not seeing more cultural events? Again, the simple answer is that it's too expensive to hope to put a licensed bar in, and generally people are still going to want to come out and have a drink in those spaces. So it ends up being that sort of ends up being the issue. As we sort of said, if we could break some of the issues that are happening around the cultural license and occasional license and make them more accessible for people, that would actually drive some sort of development in those areas. On top of that, then having spaces that are less expensive for people to hire out. I mean, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, these places were getting filled. You would have, the likes of Budweiser sponsoring your venues and helping pay for it. Those days are long gone. They really are. And instead, what we're seeing is, for example, Timmy and Jordan, who run the Night Institute, who do a lot of the events in East Belfast, they're actually thinking about, well, how do I just provide for my community and have local artists being in that space? And in actual fact, it's working well for them.
Are they the ones leading the sort of Banana Block and then you?
Yes, so they would skip between those spaces, and Banana Block is another good example. That there's a space that could be used for as a dance floor focused venue, but it's running off a theatre license, which means that its license is really to 11 o'clock. They can get an extension at sometimes to 1. But if that was a space in any other city in the UK, people would be falling out of there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And there's no reason why That couldn't be the case or shouldn't be the case, so long as, again, it's done safely. We make sure that there's transport needs for everybody. But in some ways, we've been talking about this and thinking about these later opening hours. One of the things it can do is it can actually help the impact that we have in terms of everybody trying to get home at the same time or everybody falling out in the street at the same time. And there was a taxi driver who spoke on the TV about this when she was out driving her cab. She was like, why are they not staggering the times? We're getting hit with everybody falling into the street at one time. And so a bit of staggering would help, and a bit of thought, by city councils as to what spaces are, how they're used, and allowing young curators and promoters to come in and use those spaces would really sort of develop the nighttime economy here.
And just finally from me, culture night in Belfast.
Culture
night?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously hugely successful previously, but one-off event seems to be being resurrected somewhat by Belfast City Council, and have been discussions with the department here about supporting that. One, just want to check, do you think it's important that we try to resurrect that? But two, how do we ensure that there's a long-term benefit from that it's not just a one-night event that people think, oh, it's great, I can drink on the street in Belfast, but how we actually ensure that those artists who are out there showcasing their great work actually get a legacy from that, and ensuring that there's between each year that they actually get some benefit from that, and it's not just a turn up for one night event and then everyone goes home.
I think, well, I'll let Holly take a little bit of this, but I think there have been challenges with Culture Night in the past. In its early days, it seemed to work very, very well and was driven by the community and the people that run it. And ultimately, I would believe that that's where it needs to go back to. Saying that, there does need to be a bit more of a consultation done on this. I know that there is at the minute. There's a bit more discussion into this. I know Belfast Regional Music Board and Chris McCreary from there is really thinking about this and thinking about how we move forward on it. Holly, would you like to say something about artists?
Yeah, I think it really just depends on what comes out of this consultation at the end of the day. That's how we operate at Free the Night. It's just based off what the evidence says. Mm-hmm. So until we see that, we wouldn't really have an opinion on it. We would love to see the return of Culture Night as long as it's in the best interests of the creatives at the heart of it. From talking to other people, I didn't live here when Culture Night was going on. I only moved back in 2019, but my understanding is that there's some bitterness with some artists because it is a free event, but then certain events were funded by other brands, so certain artists did get paid, and I think a lot of people didn't fully understand maybe what they were signing up to, and then that created a bit of tension within the community. But yeah, at the end of the day, it really comes down to what comes back from this consultation.
But in principle, it's something you'd like to see come back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I think we were the only. Were we one of the only major cities last year in Ireland that didn't have it?
Yeah,
so it's.
I think we're the only.
Yeah, it's not a good look. That's for sure.
100% agree with you. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much. It was really, really interesting to hear the work you've been doing. I represent Fermanagh, South Tyrone, so I know so many people come to me and say, nighttime economy, it's the same old, same old. A lot of provincial towns are the same, so the night mover bus would be, I'd be encouraging people come to Belfast, come, a nighttime economy there, come and experience it. But and ultimately, I'd hope that will filter down, more nightlife options and offerings further out of the city centre. And I think this is really interesting. Following on last week, there was a High Street Summit about how to reinvigorate the High Street, and this is a really crucial point, in the evolution really of our, on-street usage. I'm just curious to know, have you engaged with the creative industries? We had a very interesting presentation last week from them, and I could see film and screen somehow being part of, what you do in dance. I'm not sure whether you think that's something that can be incorporated into it.
Yeah, I mean, the arts generally is very well connected, and I think that all of these different elements tend to bleed into each other. What we see now is more and more spaces having much higher production. Even those small venues, they're really thinking about what that means, and that does mean that you're, engaging with people who make film and create that sort of content as well. And I think that, there's just there's a need, and what we find as well is since Free the Night formed, we've been trying to gather those voices together who really want to think about what they do after dark. I think that this has been one of the things that's been lacking for a very long time. Certainly when the initial licensing consultation, before we had even formed, I had eyes on it, and I had sent it out to a number of different people who work in the industry. And when that consultation came back, I realised that none of them had responded to it. So it was really at that point that Holly and I came together and said, no, there needs to be a voice here. There needs to be a voice that is actually helping people think about what these consultations are and why it's important to get involved in it. I think prior to us setting up, there was very few people from the late night industries engaging with politicians or actually coming out and speaking about what these issues are. So I think in part, I want to say I really want to thank all of our volunteers, our trustees, and the people who have supported us. I think that's really important. But the work that we will do to engage wider community within the arts sector will continue. And even though our focus has been dance floors, I grew up on them, as you know, Holly is a DJ. We have trustees that come from the Irish traditional, movement, and they have the same issues where some of the things that they want to shine a light on, they can't because they're having to happen behind closed doors in some ways. And the same thing happens with ourselves. There are many things that go on that we would love to be able to shine a light on, and we can't always do it because they have to happen in a slightly underground way. And that gives the impression that there are things not happening in Northern Ireland. We don't have culture, we don't have music, and it's like, no, these things are happening. We just have to keep it a little bit quieter. What we want to be able to do is shine a light on that and show people what's going on and have culture happening in our city centres. There's no reason why the day can't bleed into the night. There's no reason why spaces that are used for theatre or comedy can't become live venues for singer-songwriters, and then later in the evening become spaces for people to dance in. And that will allow a venue to have a much wider cultural offering as well. So, the entire arts community is incredibly important to us. We hope that some of them are listening. We hope that they reach out to us, and we would always try to engage with them as well.
Diana, David?
Okay, Boyd and Holly, I remember being at your launch about 2-3 years ago, which was really inspiring at that time, and I agree with everything that has been said. We're supportive, completely supportive. I just want these two little things out. The transport system, I just think, is a no-brainer. Why it hasn't happened now is unreal, really. I suppose I was out in town last Saturday night in Belfast, and you're leaving at midnight, and the reason is because you can't get home when you don't live in the city. But you talked about a levy. Would you talk us through what your what that would look like, or what you're thinking on that is, just to tease that out a little bit?
Sure. We've had a number of meetings with TransLink over the last few years, and we understood the need for finding more funding for this, and it's such a big problem. One of the suggestions that we brought them was this idea of a levy, and we actually had a ticketing company from Belfast who works with a number of large events and music events and sporting events as well, across the spectrum, and he volunteered to work with us on this and gave a percentage of the tickets that he the booking fee, and put it back into public transport. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we were wanting to see, and what we were speaking about earlier, this need for putting some money together for public transport over maybe the other ideas that have been spoken about recently, because we feel that that's the most important thing at the moment.
And looking at some other examples, I think it's in Amsterdam that if you buy a ticket to a football match, you get your transport included in that. And we were thinking something very similar. If there was to be a case where there is a cost added to a ticket, maybe of £1 or £1.50, that can go to transport, but also meant that you were getting your transport for free, what we found was that although only 20% of people would take that option of using transport, 100% of people buying the ticket would be paying for it. Ultimately, if you had all cultural events, sporting events, music events, everything across the board, paying £1, £1.50 towards public transport, you'd pay for it. You could have a service which is free at point of use. It means that you wouldn't be raising the age for pensioners to get on a bus anymore. We keep it at the right age. So we think that there's something upon us in terms of the cultural industries to put back into that. But it's not to be focused on those grassroots organisations and promoters here in Belfast. It's to do with the ticketing companies themselves. And where we see the likes of the Belfast ticketing company coming to us and saying, yes, by all means, we would want to see development of our public transport, and we would like to see that. The larger ticketing companies, the likes of Ticketmaster, the multinationals, who don't put a penny back into Northern Ireland, should also be thinking about doing this. And that's where we need to see that money coming from.
You're socialising the cost. You're socialising the cost of public transport across. I suppose it's something I've been banging on for years. And I'm not disagreeing, but we give our old, retirement. You get your bus pass, but we don't give it to the under 24s. You would take the school out of the. If you were to provide free transport at that age and start to change culture. Just moving on slightly to go on just on Diane's point, the high street, and I've been doing quite. I'm going to come out the Lisburn in my own area. I've been selfish here, but if I look at Lagan Valley, for example, I've got Dromore, I've got Hillsborough, I've got Moira, and the pubs there all provide the kind of the hub really of those communities, the fabulous food, drinks, and that. But whenever you come into Lisburn, you come into the bigger kind of destination of that. There's so little there, and we've been doing quite a bit of work at the minute around repurposing that. And one of the things I've been talking about is moving the arts centre into the town. So moving the theatre right into the town to start to drive that. If you were to do that, is that enough to then start? I'm trying to think of how do you kickstart something that isn't there. So how do you start that night time to allow the high street to repurpose, if you like?
I mean, I would go back to what I was saying about what we've seen in other cities. The likes of Manchester, it was the arts community that really did it. And they were given space, or at least there was space that was cheap enough for them to be able to rent and own and use. So one of the very first things that I can remember seeing in Manchester when I moved over there was a skate shop that was probably the length of this room in some ways, and it had a skate park in the middle of it and clothes and t-shirts. But they were able to get a temporary licence, and suddenly they had a shop front with music going on, and people were walking up to the door, and it started to become a space to go into. And then you had another bar that opened next door. People would go there beforehand. You had a little coffee shop, a restaurant opened across the road. So really inviting in your creatives, I think, and this is what we would say to people do, within your own city council areas, you need to think about the nighttime economy for yourselves. And that means having a bit of a smaller task force or an advisor or somebody who can bring those stakeholders in and really listen to them. But if you're really looking to develop the arts in an area, bring in the artist, ask them what they need and what they want and how they can do that. But what you're saying is also really relevant. If you bring in those bigger institutions into the centre, like the theatre, the gallery, the museum, those are things there where you would like to see people come, use that space, go on and get a bite to eat, and then go on into a cultural space afterwards.
Oh, cheers. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both for the presentation and for coming in today. I suppose two questions or points that I would have, and I'm glad to hear some of our urban reps have already touched on it, following on from what Diana was saying. So around the idea of the transport piece, so I'm a Mid Ulster rep. Where I live, I actually would have to get a lift to get a bus to go into Derry or Belfast, and being now in my 30s, I'm at an age where if we decide to go to Belfast for a night, that's a big deal, and that has to be planned in advance, and we're leaving at 11 o'clock to still only be home at 1:30. But how do we ensure then that our rural communities can benefit from this? You often think, and it's sort of touched upon in terms of what your presentation has outlined, and the importance of the arts from the perspective of the creative industries and from the people who bring so much to society beyond just economic impact. And we want to make sure everyone can benefit from that. How do we ensure this isn't just Belfast centred?
It's twofold in some ways. Again, it's that idea of artists and local artists in the area having space to be able to create something in that local area. So, there shouldn't be a need for everybody to come into Belfast every Friday and Saturday night if you've got a cultural venue in your local area. But similarly, like you're saying, it's a challenge for you to get into Belfast. I live on the very edges of North Belfast, and I still would take my car in on a Saturday night because I can't rely on the public transport and there's a bus stop across the road. So I recognise what you're saying, and I'm even closer to Belfast, and we've spoken about this before, that, you know, if you wanted to come from Ballyclare, Larne, or out, you know, towards Lisburn into Belfast, you're into 40, 50 pounds for a taxi, you know, and the same to get back home again. And we were discussing this the other day, that we see less and less people from other areas in Northern Ireland coming out in Belfast now, because what used to happen is 4 or 5 people would come down, they'd book themselves one room in a Holiday Inn that cost 80 quid at the time. They could all stay there and get home the next day. You know, a hotel room's now £180 for the night. And trying to sneak more than 2 people into a hotel room might be challenging in this day and age. But, you know, we need to be thinking about, how do things become more cost effective for people? And how do we drive that consumer confidence again? So, you know, affordable and reliable public transport would be a big one, you know, in terms of driving people into those areas. But also, you know, places for people to be able to stay in an affordable manner. You know, people used to go up to Portrush every single weekend. You know, there used to be a number of amazing venues there. I used to travel to Armagh every weekend, or to Dungannon. These places were just meccas for going out in. You know, it was something that we did all the time, and it wasn't seen as unusual or strange. Now, if we were to say to young people, oh, yeah, I used to go to Ballymena or Dungannon or Armagh, they'd be like, for what? You know, what were you going there for? But there's no reason why these spaces can't come into existence again. There's no reason why we can't build community, culture, and experiences for people in local places, or in major cities like Derry or Belfast. And so, when you, without sounding like cliche, if you build it, they will come. You know, if you build a space that is culturally vibrant and is offering something really special in any place in Northern Ireland, people will come from other areas to go to it, and you will see that.
Thanks. Share with your indulgence. Just so I suppose you've led on to the next thing that I wanted to ask you. So see, when you refer there to like the spaces within the rural areas, so the area that I come from, you'll probably be aware of Glasgowbury. I don't know if you know the Glasgows and the work that they've done. And I suppose that's a brilliant example. So basically, run as a charity now, they take young people, teach them lots of instruments. They've got a samba band, they've got all sorts of creative classes, and for years had successfully run a festival, Glasgowbury, very creatively named, I feel. But obviously this steam ran out of that, and that hasn't happened now in about 15 years because it wasn't financially viable anymore, and we have lost that. And I suppose my question is around, and I know an awful lot of, even in the presentation, the sort of asks of your group in terms of like the bit about the licensing law, because that's when you think about this particular sector in rural settings, like the Ballinscreen used to have the highest proportion of pubs per head of population anywhere in Ireland, and we've now dropped that down to like we have 3 pubs. But we've lost as part of that, you know, it's the socialising and the community hub, and particularly for older people and all of that. But without it being financially viable or having an economic input that is very clearly defined, how do we, in the circumstances that we're operating within, in the challenging economic context, how do we push that forward?
Well, again, there's a couple of things to address there. People's preferences for going out have changed. That's just a simple fact. You know, we have people who are drinking less when they go out, and that's a good thing. You know, we see the health benefits of that. That doesn't mean that those spaces can't be financially viable. You know, they just need to think about what the offering is that they're giving. But ultimately, there is another thing here. I mean, it's something that we've already spoken about, which is that culture isn't always commercially viable, but it's always culturally viable. It's always important to a small community and the people who use it. We've been saying for quite some time that there's new musical styles that an awful lot of young people, well, I say an awful lot of young people, enough young people want to go out and see that would make it culturally viable, but it's not commercially viable. So 50 kids in a room listening to a style of music that they really enjoy is a community, but it's not commercialism. And so we need to create spaces for that to happen. And that's why, we said, it's up to each individual council to think about having space, allowing for that to develop. And what you'll find is, if there is a space that's providing something which has cultural merit and people are coming out to see it and you allow it to grow, it can eventually become financially viable. But we must support it in the interim. Similarly, if you're thinking about the pubs that have already existed in rural areas, and they're thinking about the impact of cost of living, rates which are incredibly high in Northern Ireland, the cost of VAT, etc., etc. Well, there does need to be some support from those businesses, and we would like to see support from those businesses. It can't be a sticking plaster. So, reduction in VAT, although that's great, that's only a sticking plaster for a certain amount of time. We need to think about things where, we can, again, build consumer confidence, have easy ways for people to get to and from those spaces. One of the things that really impacted pubs that we learned when we first started off in rural locations, and it's a strange one to say, but it was laws around drink driving. A lot of people were driving to the pub in the rural area. There's not many buses in rural areas, so once those drink driving laws came in, you saw less and less people going to the pub. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? I would say, for health reasons, it's probably a good reason. We don't want people drinking and driving on the roads. But how did we think about that impact on those people? Is there a community bus? Is there something that local rural communities can do to think about how do we get them in there? Is there something that the local community themselves can think about in terms of having designated drivers? But also then, maybe not having as much emphasis on we're all going to the pub to get drunk. We're going to the pub for, if you look at the likes of the OES Centre, they now have a computer games night with vintage games. They run a quiz night. They run an arts night. That building's also seen as a bit of a museum for music. There's no reason why those things can't be done in rural areas as well. I think it's just a case of having those options for people and sort of diversifying what it is you're offering, maybe in a local pub, while also creating new cultural spaces for music and for arts to thrive in.
Thanks. Thank you.
Patrick?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. It's been really interesting, and it's definitely an issue that I suppose I'm really keen to work on. We've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of years with Everton Square in Derry, and with some of the I suppose some of the artists who wanted to perform there. But I will come back to that in a second question. But just my initial question. Obviously, we're looking at the expansion of McGee, which is moving at pace. And one of the things I'm keen to understand in that as well, as we talk about the transport, we talk about the academic side of it, we talk about the accommodation, the big drive for a lot of young people and for a lot of students is the nightlife. So it's to see if there have been any specific conversations you've had in terms of growing that in Derry and in terms of what offering there needs to be for students coming to McGee.
We haven't had we have somebody on our After Dark Alliance that comes from Derry and Strabane City Council. They work within hospitality part of the council and tourism, and so they've been given this remit to start thinking about what that means. We haven't directly engaged with this idea of students in Derry. However, one of our trustees actually works in student services in Ulster University here in Belfast. And they've been a very big proponent of saying, what is it that we've got for those students after dark? I mean, one of the things that she says, as she lives in the city centre, is that on a Wednesday night, she sometimes go out in the evening to step outside her building and she finds students milling about, not knowing what to do. They can't even go, you can't even find like a spar open on a Monday night after 6 or 7 p.m. in Belfast city centre. So to find any sort of cultural offering is even more difficult. But she's had a number of conversations with students where they're like, well, what is there for us? What is there after sort of 7 p.m. during the week that would keep students engaged and keep them there? But that similarly goes to our professionals. We have somebody who's one of our volunteers that works for one of the FTSE 500 companies and is based here in Northern Ireland. And they have a lot of foreign workers there, many who come from the United States and from places in Europe. And they say the same thing. What is there for us to do after certain times at night? And so we are starting, and it's partly to do with our own capacity. We are totally volunteer led. I'm taking half a morning off work to come here and to do this today. But our plan is to go and engage with those different areas, with those larger businesses, and to try and find out what it is that the needs are for their staff, and also try to think about how some of those larger businesses that are very profitable can actually help the arts in Northern Ireland as well. So we'd love to continue that conversation with you. Maybe we could come up and see you and get to meet some of those people within the university and have that wider conversation. We also do plan to do some more surveying, and that would mean surveying students in Northern Ireland, and also we want to get an understanding of people who have left Northern Ireland and what their key reasons and drivers for that are. So we'll be doing a bit of research on that as well.
No, that's really useful, and I think that surveying had been something that I wanted to come back to as well, because I think like the evidence that you're presenting today is really useful and really, really informative, and obviously, as you mentioned, you know, it is volunteer led, and therefore it's more difficult to, I suppose, to get that broader scope, and those surveys and stuff out, because you're obviously doing it out of your own time and your own passion for it as well, and for the arts and this sector. But I suppose, you know, is there, or are there any plans, sorry, to get a broader survey out to understand like the different needs between, because like I was a student in Belfast myself, lived in Belfast, and like I know that a lot of my friends who were in Derry, and similarly people who are in Derry now, would have very different, I suppose, you know, I suppose desires for where they would go, for what events would be on, compared to Belfast, where there is a lot more opportunity and a lot broader options. So is there any kind of survey that you're planning over the next while that's going to encompass that regional balance piece, that disparity between regions and so on?
Well, at the minute we hadn't planned to do a survey that focuses on regional disparity, but that is a very good point. It is something that we've always spoken about. You know, although things can become very Belfast-centric quite quickly, when we talk about stuff in terms of Northern Ireland. We do talk about the capital city when we talk about late night transport, simply because we are one of the only capital cities in Europe without one. But you know, we've worked very closely with different promoters and artists in Derry. We were very clear to call out the executive office when they weren't opening up Ebrington Square, to make sure that it was diverse and had a range of different offerings. And we even said that some of the language around raves, you know, described in a way which seemed derogatory, wasn't really acceptable for us. In some way, raves are places of culture, you know, and although there's a negative connotation with it, in actual fact, from our experiences, those places are very, very positive. But although at the minute we don't have something specific which looks at those regional imbalances, this is something that we're always saying to those people in those areas that we meet. You know, you need to figure out what it is that your community needs, and you need to figure that out with those local artists, local curators, and local businesses. And if there's any way, and this also includes in terms of an interdepartmental task force, although, as I say, our capacity is very limited, we're here to try and support all of you as well. If there's any way that we can help facilitate and bring together an interdepartmental task force, please contact us. We'll be the first to put our hand up and say that we want to be part of it. Similarly, if there's any way that we can engage with your local communities in a way that can explain what the need is and why these things are important, we'll happily come out and give you our time. We really will.
No, that would be really useful and very much appreciated as well. And I know, like, you obviously do work, and you've people in the Northwest as well. I'm just thinking, you know, in terms of a few of the things you've said, one of the things that I think would be really useful is that you've so much experience and such a breadth of experience. but it's getting the, I suppose, the qualitative data and the quantitative data around that. You know, how does it impact different people? And that's kind of why I'm suggesting, I suppose, the survey, because I think it would be really useful. And it just highlights and evidences the points that you're speaking to, and that you've brought up your experience and other people's experience of. So I just think that would be really useful. Really happy to kind of take the conversation offline and do that. But I definitely very much hear the points that you've raised around that. I know I've worked with a lot of groups in Derry who I would know personally, and like, I think the point I always go back to is, like, when I was 17 and Everton Square was kind of becoming what it was as a venue for arts and for culture. You had one big weekend, you had Jika there regularly, and it's actually looking at how successful that was, how it put Derry on the map for huge international artists, and actually how do we get back to that point. So really happy to take the conversation offline and to continue working together. And look, thanks for your presentation. It's been really, really useful.
Not a problem. And I'll just mention that I know our researcher, Ciara Para, will be watching this, and she'll be noting everything that you've said. And although I might not be able to respond to some of those bits about research, I'm sure Ciara will have notes for me when we get back today, and we will reach out to you and we can have a chat with you about that.
Thank you, Patrick. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I think it's fair to say there is such a culturally rich musical tradition in Northern Ireland, regardless of what your interest is, that you'll find something that meets that standard and to a very high quality. I suppose probably for me, and whilst I recognise that, I suppose I can't get away from the fact being that there is some negative impacts when we bring large groups of people together. I mean, yourself, Boyd, mentioned about how you would travel to Armagh or wherever there was a scene, and with large gatherings of people there is negative impacts, and I would be interested to hear your view on how we can as a society prepare for those and counter them in the longer term. Like, I'm sure other members here have the same, like drugs, for example. I know young people that have been in some of these music venues, even very recently, that have unfortunately lost their lives to drug overdose. And the devastation that it has caused in local communities and the scars that continues to have is unbearable. Rise in antisocial behaviour. I mean, sometimes, and I don't want to be all negative, but nobody has yet, so I want to put it on the table. I know music scenes in my own constituency, not there now, but essentially the disregard some people had when they came to local communities and destroyed it in many ways. Police presence, the pressures that they're facing. So I'm just be interested to hear how you believe we can counter that. I mean, recently there was a Reclaim the Night, I think it was, where there was a lot of women that believe that our society and space is no longer safe for women at night. The rise in drink spiking, for example. How does your organisation look at those societal problems that sometimes, and I don't think this is always a fair, consequence of some of the fantastic artists and the music they put on, but how do we counter that?
So there's a few things to say about that. One is that when licensing changed in the rest of the UK, what they saw was an increase in the opening times, and rather than seeing an increase in crime and in violence, what they actually saw was it distributed throughout the evening. So there wasn't an increase in that. Similarly, the licensing review that came back said that there is a very, very close link to off sales and public health issues, whereas they don't see that with pubs. They do see a slight increase in crime when you see a slight increase in the number of pubs that exist. Another bit of information just to be aware of is that the PSNI reported back to the Belfast bids that crime right across the board, other than shoplifting, is down. So we are seeing much lower levels of crime, and we also see a much better approach to going out at night from young people. When I was going out 25 coming up to 30 years ago, we maybe didn't take as much precaution in going out. We threw chance to the wind. People had drinking habits that maybe weren't as good as they are now, where people sort of moderate their intake. In terms of things like spiking, we would be proponents of having spiking kits in venues. We think that should just be standardised, that should exist, and people should be able to make access of those things. In terms of the issues that you might see with substance use, that needs to be considered in a much broader and deeper fashion. We would be fairly anti-prohibition. What we see as prohibition causes issues. We would much rather see initiatives like we see in Bristol, where they've got In the Loop, where people can actually come and test any substances that they may wish to take. Ultimately, what you find is that if you start to criminalise hard or put a lot of security in, it actually can create more issues, because people are then taking a lot of substances, thinking, oh, I'll take all of these before going in case security finds them, and then you find bigger issues. Really what you want to do is create spaces which are safe for people, where if people are going to come in and use something, that they can try as best possible to use that substance responsibly. And so, having spaces where those things could be tested and be thought about, and breaking down that taboo would be a really positive intervention. You also talked about just more general antisocial behaviour. When we were talking earlier and saying that there's a need for lots of departments to be involved in this, including the likes of the Department of Education, we had actually saw something about a year ago where we thought that there was a space for the likes of Holly and I, or others similar to us, to engage with young people in schools who are coming into their last years of school, so 16, 17. They're about to go out into this environment. They're about to have these rites of passage where they'll be on dance floors. But there's still a lot of very poor behaviour. And so if we could do something which was about, as RSE now has a whole part about consent, could people like myself and Holly go in and be speaking to young adults who are about to go into cities and explaining to them the importance of consent, of good behaviour, about consumption, about thinking about their drinking habits and what they're doing, and making sure people recognise that these spaces are meant to be safe spaces. They're meant to be culturally viable spaces. They're not spaces where you're out to start fights, you're out to get into an argument, you're out there to be sort of abusive or sexually aggressive towards women. And these are just things that we need to build into our young people in order to create a sort of more social responsibility when they go out at night.
I think that's an interesting point about how, as a community, organisations like yourselves could engage with school children. I think that is an interesting point. I still have huge concerns about how we address the drug problem, and indeed the antisocial behaviour problem that these large concerts bring to certain areas, and how that overspills into communities. Still have a huge concern of that. And when we talk about crime is down, reported crime is down, but our police officers are at a place the lowest ever since 1998. They're facing huge pressures. And again, whenever I speak to local police officers in my community, a lot of this can be to the negative impact of some venues for nightlife. And I think that's not unfair to brand all, particularly musical creators and content creators, because I think we need to try to divorce, the drink culture with the music scene. I recently was at the launch of Pulse Online Radio. It's in my own local community in Portadown. There was a group of guys that got together who had all suffered mental health issues and love their music. They've taken on their own studio in an old mill in Portadown and are attempting through that venue to create a space for local artists to come in to hopefully bring people in from the wider community, people that are struggling perhaps with similar issues, to have a space to talk, but also a space to give local artists a platform. Now, there's no relationship with alcohol to that particular venue, and I think that's the important conversation, that we can give local artists an opportunity in regenerating our high streets and derelict buildings, but giving them the ability to do so in a safe environment, particularly for young people.
And I think I'm not one usually to curtail discussion, but we have a concurrent meeting with our agriculture colleagues at 12, and we have another guest that's coming. So from my perspective, can I firstly thank you so much for coming along. There's a number of follow-up aspects that we will be taking up, just in terms of checking with departments if they're keen to get involved in a nightlife task force. And also I might write to you just to find out some more about the After Dark Alliance. Was that the right term? Because keen to hear more about that, so that's okay.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time. Really,
Thank you
really
very
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
Cheers for your time.
And colleagues, my apologies for bringing that to a close. It's just our ADS colleagues are out there for half an hour, and then our agriculture folk are arriving at 12.
Chair,
Yes.
is the committee content then to write to Free the Night and just ask them about the After Dark Alliance?
Yep.
And also to write to the department seeking its commentary on a task force for the nighttime economy, the development of non-commercial cultural spaces, and even its commentary on a ticket levy. Let's see.
I think that would be worth the discussion. Or is that Department of Economy, or is that, where is that? Yeah.
With economy.
Yeah, okay. The other, I was going to ask something else. The licensing laws they talked about, does that sit in
You mean
DSA.
communities?
KSA?
Definitely
It's on it.
communities.
Yeah, no problem. Will
Do you want to?
No.
Yeah.
Look, interesting to listen to. I think that's probably the first presentation we've ever had to cut off early. Happy that most of this content is with DFC, but interesting points to raise. But I just on again about antisocial behaviour and how
That's
it's
important you put those on the record,
Yeah,
so thank you.
I
very
think
much.
so too.
Gentlemen, sorry, apologies, you're all very welcome. Take a seat, take a seat. Okay, on behalf of the committee, can I welcome you all here today, right in the middle, Leslie. Leslie, you're always welcome back. So Leslie Orr, Director of ADS, Aerospace Systems here in Northern Ireland. Sam Turner. Sam is Chief Executive of the AMME site from Queen's University. Sam, good to see you again. Kevin McNamee, Chief Executive Officer, Denroy Plastics. Kevin, thank you for coming. Nigel McVean, Managing Director of Thales Integrated Aerospace Protection Systems. Very, very welcome. And Alan Henning, Director of Operations at Collins Aerospace and the Council Chairperson for ADS for Northern Ireland. Thank you so much for coming along here today and for the vital work that you do in promoting the Northern Ireland economy. I'm delighted that you have come along here today and hand over to your very, very capable hands.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you, committee. I really appreciate this. We have a team of industry leaders with us today. I'm going to start off with just a little introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to the industry leaders. It's a great opportunity to share the great work of these companies here in Northern Ireland. As you know, ADS is a national trade body for really 4 sectors: aerospace, defence, security and space, and these sectors are vital to Northern Ireland economy. ADS was set up in 2010 here in Northern Ireland, really to grow those sectors. In 2014, we launched a strategy called Northern Ireland Partnering for Growth. We worked with the executive, with Invest Northern Ireland, and the goal of that strategy, a 10-year strategy, was to double the size of the industry from £1 billion to £2 billion. And just last year, we just announced that, look, we've had huge success. The industry is now worth £2.2 billion to the Northern Ireland economy, employs over 10,000 people. They're high value, high technology jobs, and really it's a critical sector for Northern Ireland. We have submitted some papers outlining how ADS has over 130 member companies here. These companies are right across the province, from Kilkeel to Bangor, right to 5 Mile Town and Enniskillen, right across the province, and they contribute to the fabric of Northern Ireland. Really what we're here to share is, look, there's opportunity for future growth. But the history of Northern Ireland is that we're a region of great engineers. We're a region of great innovators. And, you know, we've over 100 years of heritage of making aircraft here in Northern Ireland, and a massive supply chains grown around it. We've great strengths in aerostructures, we've strengths in composites, plastics, precision engineering, aircraft interiors. So we really have great capabilities. And as you will know, Northern Ireland makes the award-winning all-composite wing for the A220 aircraft, which is major for Northern Ireland. Alan's team and other companies, we make 1/3 of all the aircraft seats in the world. Massive for a small country, that is absolutely massive. We make aircraft components for every aircraft major program across the world. We've an outstanding supply chain of small companies, and there's an amazing fact that there's a quality measure for the industry. It's called SC21, Supply Chain for the 21st Century. Right across the UK, companies are taking part in this programme. Northern Ireland, which, what are we, 3% of the UK? We hold 75% of the gold awards. In fact, Kevin's company from Denroy is a gold company. There aren't many in terms of business excellence. So this sector is recognised globally that Northern Ireland has got great capabilities. And it is an exemplar cluster, a real exemplar cluster that I'm here to share about. But what we want to share is that other countries are really after this. We need to make aware that it's a highly global competitive industry, but other countries would vow to have an aerospace industry like we do. And it does provide high technology, high value jobs. So what we're here to share is, look, the future for the industry. Globally, right now there are 16,000 aircraft on back order, which means there are 13 years of work on hand. If you think of any small business, if you can say there's 13 years order book, right, that is massive. So we really are here to say, look, let's go after this as Northern Ireland. The industry globally is in numbers are due to double in scale by the year 2034 to $791 billion. So what we're here to say is, look, let's position Northern Ireland to really gain from these high value jobs, high value industry, because we really feel that if the economy does well, everybody will do well. So that's what we're here to present. So just opening that as the points. We have a strong industry. There's a number of points we'd like to discuss, and I'm going to ask our leaders to take part. But really the first point that we'd like to share is about it is a long-term industry. Yeah. I'm going to share with Alan if he wants to. Alan's the chairman of ADS here. Do you want to share about Kilkeel and then your industry? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you for the invitation to be here. We really appreciate it. So on behalf of ADS Northern Ireland, we're really delighted to come here, and we've some really interesting facts and some really exciting businesses in the area. And I think for me, as been in the industry for 22 years, I think we don't sell enough how excellent we are here in Northern Ireland. I mean, we're not, our traditions, we're not good at blowing our own trumpet, but when I speak to leaders in my organisation, Collins Aerospace and RTX, they're blown away by the capabilities of the people we have here, the work ethic we have here, and some of the achievements that we have in this area. And as Leslie said, this industry is a really, really high potential industry to grow, not only in the commercial aerospace but also in the defence sector. Both sectors are growing markets. We're seeing in China, we're seeing in India. We have a lot of work in India at the moment. That those regions are just ramping up, and they are more and more people are flying, more and more people want to travel globally, and that opens up huge opportunities for large tier 1 organisations like myself, but also for the SMEs in this area. We're ambitious here in Northern Ireland within this sector, and as Leslie said, we have 130 members from small companies to large organisations, but we as an industry work very, very well together, and that relationship has grown over the years with Leslie's leadership. And we actually support each other very, very well, and you'll hopefully hear that through the conversations today. We are delighted to hear about announcements in Talis. We're delighted to see the Innovation and R&D Awards. We're delighted to see the investment being done in AMME, because that helps us all, because we're not in a competitive market. We're hoping that Leslie talked about a great growth from 1 billion to 2.2 billion and over 10,000 jobs. But our ambition is by 2035 to grow to 4 billion. And if you imagine that impact that can have here in Northern Ireland, it's significant. And this is one of we had the Secretary of State in a few weeks to visit us, and the aerospace is one of the areas that the government is targeting with the potential to grow and provide not only jobs, but high value jobs, engineering jobs, composites, materials science, logistics, supply chain operations jobs. So it's a very exciting industry, and we're very excited to tell you our story. I'll tell you a little bit about my business. So I'm part of RTX, which is the largest aerospace and defence company in the world. We've been here in Northern Ireland since 1967, so 57 years of history in a small town, most southerly town in Northern Ireland, Kilkeel, and we have over 1,000 employees. And in that site alone produces a quarter of the world's aircraft seats, supporting both Boeing, and Airbus, and our customers all around the world, supplying into Middle East, China, North America, and Europe. We in that business have engineering jobs, but also a lot of assembly operations jobs, and we support that area. And our employees most of them come, 80% of our employees come from about a 20-mile radius. So Newry, Banbridge, Ballynahinch, Newcastle, that whole area. So have a huge influence. We contribute about over 314 million to GDP every year, and probably supporting around 3,000 jobs in Northern Ireland alone. So we are part of this very large American organisation. When I speak to my leaders and tell them about our story when they come to visit, and a lot of the senior leadership have come, they see the site here as absolutely one of their top sites globally. We've just been awarded an award, only 5 sites globally have been awarded to it, as an innovation site where they want to invest more in our site. And what we need to do is partner with you and with our local government through INI, and we have a good relationship with them because we think there's a huge potential. And the story that I tell the corporation that I'm part of is that we work closely with government. We work closely with ADS, we work closely with INI, and they see that the country is invested in this industry, that the country is backing the industry, and as Leslie said, it is a long-term industry. We have some exciting projects that are just being announced. We'll talk to some of that today, and we have projects that we're doing on our site that will yield for the new single-aisle aircraft that will come in the next 10 years. So there are long-term investments that are needed to support this industry. Investments in capital, investments in centres like the AMME, and Sam will speak to that, but investments in skills. And there's an opportunity for us to partner together to fill the pipeline for the skills that we need for the future. And I'll invite Nigel maybe just to talk a little bit about that, about the skills as he talks about some of the exciting opportunities that they have. Nigel.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Good morning, everyone. So I represent Thales as the Managing Director of Thales in Northern Ireland.
Congratulations on the order, by the way.
Thank you, really appreciate it. Let me just give you a little bit of background about what we do, and then I can talk a little bit about the future and skills. So Thales in Northern Ireland, we are the prime contractor, manager, producer and design authority for a number of missile products, two that stand out and 2 that are particularly current. So LMM, which was subject to the recent announcement, that's a relatively short range anti-aircraft or air defence missile. So LMM, widely recognised as one of the key drivers in keeping Russian helicopters out of Ukraine. We also produce a product called NLAW, which is a lightweight anti-tank weapon, again shipping direct at the moment from Belfast to the front line in Ukraine. That product is widely regarded as being responsible for keeping tanks out of Kiev. Okay, made, designed here in Belfast, sent to Ukraine. Really pleased to acknowledge the order we recently got there, announced at the weekend by the Prime Minister, confirming a significant order for LMMs and associated launchers, etc. for Ukraine. Great news. What does that mean for us as a business? That means we need to continue to grow. We've been on quite a rapid growth curve over the last couple of years. We will continue to grow rapidly. At the moment, we have around 850 direct employees in Belfast. These are high-skilled, largely, actually, majority engineering jobs in Belfast. And we will bring in another 200 jobs over the next 2 years. We'll expand our Belfast footprint from the 2 existing sites we have in Northern Ireland to a 3rd site as well as part of that expansion plan. We run a skills academy in Belfast, which has been instrumental in bringing young people into our business. This year we expect to bring in 41 apprentices and graduates, and that skills academy has just been the lifeblood of bringing new talent into the organisation. But we don't just need new talent over the next few years, we actually need to bring in middle-level and senior engineers and support staff as well. So continuing to drive high value recruitment into Northern Ireland is critical. Again, just echoing what Alan says, we very much see having a defence and aerospace infrastructure supporting that. So bringing new people into Northern Ireland, bringing people into the defence and aerospace sector is actually has a positive benefit for the economy as a whole. I think I should mention, I suppose, just in addition to those 850 direct employees, our analysis says that for each of those employees, they have a 1.7 multiplier effect. So for every one person we employ here in Northern Ireland, we also support another 0.7 full-time equivalent role. So that skills pipeline is critically important for us. The ease of recruitment in Northern Ireland is critically important for us. The nature of the work we do means that we've got additional security constraints, so making sure that those staff can be brought onboarded and have got the relevant security clearances processed quickly is critical for us. That does not happen in Northern Ireland as quickly as it happens in the mainland. That is a hindrance for us at the moment in terms of recruiting people, something we're actively dealing with at the moment. And just a final point, I think, is the supply chain in Northern Ireland. So we depend very heavily on a number of key suppliers in Northern Ireland. That's for people like Denroy Plastics, and that is for things like that go into our regular production items, absolutely great, but also all of the expansion activities that we do. We're at the moment just launching around £100 million worth of investment in our facilities, capital infrastructure investment in Northern Ireland. That will be largely undertaken by local companies. That's everybody from plumbers coming in to builders, to everybody who will contribute to our sites across the patch. Really important for us. Okay.
Just Nigel, thank you so much. Just to emphasise that, so really, as Alan says, we want long-term support for the next stage of our strategy for growing. That's the first item. The skills area is really important right now. The need for skills. Things like the apprenticeship levy being properly directed to a sector-wide apprenticeship programme, whereas Nigel has his skills academy really across the sector is what we're asking for. So really helping that, quite a number of big areas that we're asking for. Just generally, growing the defence sector in Northern Ireland is so important. Nigel has announced great news this week. We've had some really good news this week, but overall the numbers right now, the government spends £100 per capita in Northern Ireland. The same number in Scotland is 380. Our number of £100 per capita in the south of England is 1,080. So really encouraging the MOD to spend more in Northern Ireland is really good. I think Nigel's numbers rebalance that a little bit, but there's still a long way to go. Another very big factor actually for Northern Ireland is 95% of our companies are right across the province are small companies, and they struggle to do business directly with the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence spends £2 million per year last year with Northern Ireland SMEs. The same number in the southeast of England or the southwest of England last year, or 2 million, was 408 million. So this week, in a number of calls that we've had, we've asked for more spending with SMEs, but specifically with Northern Ireland, and we're delighted that just this weekend the government has announced targets for spending more with SMEs, but we want that to continue here in Northern Ireland. So defence growth is another area. We're getting through a number of things here quite quickly. I'm going to ask Kevin to speak about issues companies are facing in cost of doing business in Northern Ireland. Kevin, just if you want to share about Denroy and
Denroy's unusual in that we operate in a number of sectors. We're probably best known for Denman hairbrushes. The ladies will probably know. 4 million every year go all around the world. Where they go, who knows? But we also can't help you. But there's always somebody in your house needs a hairbrush. That's what we always say. But we're unique in that we operate not only consumer products but also in defence and aerospace. So as Nigel alluded to there, we're a significant supplier into Thales. We also supply onto every Airbus platform. Every Airbus aircraft you get in the world will have plastic components made in Bangor in it somewhere. You won't see them, they're in the wings and the fuselage and so on. Also recently won a contract with Boeing, so that's about to start probably in June or so. So we'll be a significant supplier on the 737 programs and 757 as well. So really right across the industry, and Bombardier jets, if you're fortunate to have a Bombardier executive jet full of plastic components as well from Denroy. We thought we'd give a bit of an SME perspective, and the issues, the cost issues I'm going to talk about here aren't obviously specific just to the aerospace and defence sector, but the budget you know, I'm sure you're all familiar with the impact that's had on business. We're probably more exposed because of the consumer side of the business, where they're lower value components, and we have a number of employees, around 100 or so of the 250 we employee, would be above the national living wage, but not much. And that's the sector, and you know, where we have to operate. So that hike in the national living wage of around 7%, on top of the 9%, bear in mind last year, which is running 3 times inflation, is very significant. You know, that compounded with the national insurance increase and the threshold drop and the rate increase and so on, you're all, I'm sure, very familiar with. Put a number on it, $750,000 hit to Denroy payroll. So we have, you know, 250 people down there. So where do you find that? We're in long-term contracts with all of the aerospace and defence companies with fixed pricing. So I can't just ring up Nigel and say, sorry about that, can I have a price increase? It doesn't work like that. On our consumer products, yes, we can get some price increases, but that hurts consumers. You know, you're going to pay another £1 in boots for your Denman brushes, I'm afraid, from later in the year, and that's just a fact, which obviously is circular. So that's a really significant challenge for SMEs. What are we doing about it? It's brutal. We're replacing people with robots. So I know, Jonathan, you were in our factory a year or so ago and you saw some of that, and it's a theme across everybody's business here, where the cost of employment is becoming so high. Frankly, it's a choice between a robot or a product designed for automation or a manual operation, and you know what way that's swinging. So we're going to see less roles, and you can say, oh, isn't that great? You know, we are creating higher value, more skilled jobs, but we always employed hundreds of people in Bangor who were very happy to come and, you know, put things together and put them in boxes, and that was their skill set, and they were comfortable with that. So that employment may disappear in the years ahead because of the national living wage just running at that 2 or 3 times inflation, which is, and I'll not even get into the differentials and how to manage that, and everybody above the national living wage wanting the same pay increase, which is a real challenge. But you're going to hear that in every sector, I'm sure, and hospitality we know is probably the most exposed. Energy costs, look, we are where we are in terms of energy costs and availability on this island, but what can we do about it? Support for renewables, I think, is where it's at. We have had a number of programmes launched recently by INI, which are very welcome. They're quite small, but they're enabling us to go and buy more PV or think about a wind turbine or something. You know, and we've done that. We have PV all over our plant. I'm sure you're the same, Alan, as well. You know, anything to try and get the cost down. But more support around what can we do to reduce energy costs for manufacturers, particularly here, because we're heavy power users, obviously. That would be very welcome. Touch very briefly on it, water connections and all of that. You know, we put a big extension up that Jonathan was in there, that one of the requirements for that was to put a storm water, storage system in underground, which cost a fortune. It added 20% on the bill cost because the water mains can't take the flow. We're already told we may not be able to get planning permission for the next extension, which is a real problem, and I threw back at that to our local MLA at the time and said, are you serious? You know, we want to grow and create employment here, and I got sorry about that, it is what it is. So there's lots of challenges around that about infrastructure. I know it's an aerospace discussion today, but you're aware of it. And then industrial derating, I know my friends in manufacturing and I beat this drum continually, but that is important for us as well, just to keep us competitive, because we are trying to manufacture products in an island off the west coast of Europe, which isn't the ideal place. You know, you're pulling everything in, pulling everything out. There's an inherent cost in that. So where we have, these escalating costs in terms of labour and power and so on, it just makes it increasingly challenging. So there's a flavour of an SME, but in saying that, there's great opportunity. As Leslie says, there's a fantastic network of SMEs feeding into the aerospace and defence sector in Northern Ireland, and we're looking, just talking to Nigel outside when we come in, about this is fantastic news that Talis have won this big order. How do we all benefit? How do we get all the SMEs competitive and be able to give, well, Nigel and Alan what they need, and the other manufacturers in Northern Ireland, to get the whole sector super competitive and able to grow.
Thank you, Kevin. So costs are important. Also staying ahead. Northern Ireland has done well because we're great innovators and we're staying ahead. Going to bring Sam in on innovation. Sam, if you want to just share about AMME.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So, as you've heard, Northern Ireland has a world-class, UK-leading, award-winning aerospace and defence supply chain capability. And saying this objectively, I suppose, as an English guy who's been here for 2.5 years and worked in global aerospace innovation for 25 years. Always had hugely impressed by the capability here, and even more so embedded in it now. But you're hearing some of the challenges around these are competitive companies in growing markets in aerospace and defence, but to stay competitive, challenges around technology and skills, particularly looking at how do you deploy digital automation technology to do more with less, be competitive, and then to upskill the existing staff and bring the pipeline of talent through for that growth opportunity or for the large new orders that are being won. So these are challenges facing the sector, which innovation helps to address. And also, from a UK perspective, when looking at industrial strategy, UK strategy is often a GB strategy. Northern Ireland is positioned to punch way above its weight here in terms of what it can contribute for growth across industrial growth, aerospace and defence. So AMME is positioned to try and support these companies who've been phenomenally successful without this level of investment, but also to drive that growth. So innovation support in digital automation technologies, in composites, nanotech, photonics. These are areas where Northern Ireland has strengths from a research and industrial perspective, but we're here to drive that support to companies, help to innovate and de-risk and drive competitiveness, but also to build on the real strengths we have from a research and industrial perspective here, so that we're playing a part that's attracting partners and investment from outside Northern Ireland, playing an outsized role in delivering UK strategy, sectoral or government strategy as well. And that's the focus for AMME here, and also bringing the skills through, working with the colleges, with both universities, we're Queen's-led, working with both universities in AMME, to make sure we're upskilling, where we're bringing the technology that's not of great use without the skills that come with it, so building that capability in the supply chain. So that is our mission. I suppose one challenge we have, so my background, I've been seconded here from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, where I was CTO for 6 years, and I worked in another centre in Sheffield, part of the team that set that up. And at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult is part of a network of 6 manufacturing innovation centres across GB. I used to say UK, but there is not an HVM Catapult Centre in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland's certainly the only devolved part of the UK, but the only really heavily industrialised part of the UK that doesn't have an HVM Catapult Centre supporting its companies. Now, AMME looks a bit like an HVM Catapult Centre. We have the BRCD capital funding that's established it, but we don't have the revenue funding and the core grant that's a third of income that come to those other centres supporting their regional supply chains, but also making sure they're playing a key role in delivering UK and international missions. So that's a bit of a mismatch and an imbalance there. And really we're looking for support to make sure we can secure what a fair playing field, really, to not only support Northern Ireland businesses and the strong sectors we have here, but also make sure we're equipped to deliver what the UK needs as a whole, and to attract further investment and growth into the only part of the world that has this kind of capability. And of course, dual market access. It's a phenomenal opportunity for a modest investment at a UK level that would drive and complement the capital funding that's been gratefully seen to establish AMME as a catapult-like centre. Obviously working closely with other centres, but we need that funding. And I suppose the other thing as well as securing that additional funds, it means, without that funding, there's a risk that we can't invest to advance the industrial state of the art, which is the mission, that we're always a bit nearer to market, and therefore there's a risk that Northern Ireland businesses aren't accessing the best they can, but also that we're not representing the best of Northern Ireland, both research and industrial capabilities on a global stage, and attracting the partnerships and investments, which is a fundamental part of the AMME mission and ambition. And I'm extremely optimistic about that mission and ambition, but we do need a fair level playing field. And I suppose the one thing we don't need, it could be a risk, is any funding implications that would put at risk some of the Queen's underwriting that's happening. So it's both universities, we're based within Queen's, and the AMME business plan, because of this lack of core funding, actually has a deficit underwriting, multi-million-pound balance position that has been underwritten by Queen's that will take about 7-8 years to turn into a break-even position. So that's critical. So that
expand on that slightly, Sam. What's giving you that view?
Sorry?
Do you want to expand on that slightly? So, are you talking about the proposed £10 million cut by the department to Queen's University in the draft budget?
Yeah, that could put it. There's no kind of formal, but it could put at risk the £10 million proposed cut to Queen's. Could put at risk that the Queen's obviously publicly has been trying to cut its cloth accordingly in terms of a difficult economic environment due to the reduction of student numbers, international student numbers, but at the same time, beyond the declared investment that Queen's is making into AMME, which is as a commitment, it is also underwriting a deficit position of a few million over the first few years, and that becomes harder in a challenging funding environment, especially if there's a significant reduction in the grant to Queen's.
Thank you, Sam. So it's really ongoing support for innovation. The final point, Chairman, we just want to share, I think you asked me to share about clustering, and clustering is important to Northern Ireland. Really, clustering is a very good thing for companies to get together and work together, and ADS over the last 15 years has really been an exemplar cluster. We do work together, we sell together, and we help each other. And we're very happy to help other clusters in Northern Ireland develop, actually, because that's so important. You know, I know agri-food, life sciences, digital, clustering is good. What we're actually seeing, government has put support for clustering. What we would actually like to say into that is that before you fund a new cluster to set up, make sure this cluster is totally industry funded. Yep. Make sure there's a long-term sustainable program. Don't start a cluster if it's not going to be sustainable. First thing. The second thing, a cluster without market access you really need to win business. And personally, we're coming across competitive clusters that are government funded competing with private funded clusters. So really just a comment on that area, that let's be wise. And how many clusters do we want in Northern Ireland? What I would suggest is, in the programme for government, there's about 5 or 6 great areas that we're strong at. Let's have 5 or 6 major clusters for Northern Ireland, because these business leaders can't attend every cluster meeting if we're going to have hundreds of clusters. So just you asked for a little input on that. That's our experience, and I hope the evidence we've brought to you today has been helpful, but we're very open to any questions as a team, as companies. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that. I think that's really, really useful and really insightful. I think your success is in spite of these institutions and the support from government, and not because of it. If this industry was in any other part of the world, it would be held up as a model example. You know, Northern Ireland producing 1 in 3 airplane seats for everywhere in the world. If any other country had that, that would be up in big, shiny, bright lights all over the world, that we have a heritage of 100 years of delivering that. If we had a situation where things produced in Belfast was defending democracy in Ukraine, that would be up in bright lights. Instead, we have a disgraceful, in my view, and I speak in a personal capacity, attack on local companies by political leaders, and I do want to start there, Nigel. So I just wanted to read the record. So firstly, question 8 on Monday from member for East London Derry, Claire Stoughton, referenced your company and stated, given your involvement in Palestine, naming your country. Do you know what she's talking about?
So I can only confirm that the Talis Belfast and Talis Northern Ireland has no relationship with or supplies any products to Palestine.
We have members in this House who stand up and put on the record in informed positions that then lead to protests outside a company that employ people from all communities across Northern Ireland and none. And I just want to make clear from my personal position that we have a responsibility as democratic leaders in this place to show leadership and not to make up facts to suit political identities. Secondly, the response from the First Minister to say that a investment in Northern Ireland that would produce £1.6 billion of investment, again, 200 jobs that would employ people of all colours, creeds, traditions and none, to say that that was incredulous. I want to attract as many jobs and investment to Northern Ireland as possible. No other political leader in the world would describe that as a local company. So I just want to give you firstly the opportunity, Nigel, saying that you don't have the ability to respond to that in the House, if there's anything you want to say to either of those two issues.
No, I'll not respond directly to that if you don't mind.
No, not at all, because you're focused on doing your job, which is attracting investment and providing jobs, and that's the job of our political leaders, and they should get on with doing it instead of making political points. I just want to make issues in relation to a number of things, because I think your work plays into the vital role of the Minister's economic vision. So regional balance. Alan, I'm not sure there are too many other companies in Kilkeel employing 1,000 people.
No, we are the largest employer in the region, obviously. So it's very important, and me and my leadership team take our role very serious. We have 57 years of history. I'm 22 years. Most of my senior team are local people in the area who've been 15 to 20 years in the business, so very, very invested. It feels, it's a very large organisation, but it feels very family oriented. But we do feel responsibility to provide good jobs in that area. But we do want to work in partnership with local companies, and one of the things that I'd like to invite even the committee, if that was possible to do it here now, is we would invite you to come to the facility. Great. And to come, what we've done for the Secretary of State visit lately was bring a lot of the local SMEs so they could come and share their story and tell what they need, because they're also facing challenges that Kevin is facing. And there's some really, really exciting other small business in that area, and you'd be very welcome to come along, and we would host you. And hopefully then we can not only tell our story, but also help facilitate expanding the aerospace sector in South Down, because we think there's huge opportunity to work with our local technical colleges, which we are doing through our apprenticeship programs, and we supported both Down and Uri, and that's very, very successful for us. We've developed some really good higher level apprenticeship programs in that area through that. So we're bringing young people, local people who want to stay in the area, which is really important to us. My family live in the area. I want them to have an opportunity to work for a global company and still live Newry, Banbridge, South Down area. So I think that's really fantastic opportunity for us. But yeah, our organisation, as I said, they see the Kilkeel site as something very, very special. And we get very, very good feedback from customers all around the world. And because we're in the industry we're in, we get executive level. So today in our facility, the executive team of British Airways are on site with our executive team because of some of the products we're doing. So people at that level in our global companies are coming to Kilkeel because of the type of product we do, the final product the passenger interacts with. So I think that's a great opportunity. I would say that we are a partnership in ADS, and Leslie's leadership has been fundamental to that. And the Skills Academy that we've built in Talis, we've actually created our own training academy. It's an area where we can actually work together. And I think if, with the right support and partnership, we can work together to not only help our business, but help build skills in that area. And I keep talking about the pipeline. We want to grow in Northern Ireland, a pipeline of young, talented people who want to work in engineering, logistics, supply chain, operations, a lot of very exciting roles. And through those roles, we think we can not only help the aerospace and defence industries, but also other industries. Those skills are transferable to the food sector, to manufacturing sectors. So I think there's a real opportunity to support this industry, and actually it'll help the wider Northern Ireland. And even through what Sam spoke earlier on, we're looking at robotics, we're looking at production systems, we're looking at design, smart design, but those are transferable skills that help Northern Ireland and attract those type of people to Northern Ireland, which are help all the industry. So to Leslie's point, investing in these specific clusters, specific industries can have a very, very wide impact, not only in Kilkeel where we are, but right across Northern Ireland.
And it just also feeds in across the industry, so regional balance, ministerial priority, and you employ people and sites right across Northern Ireland, good jobs. I imagine that people who come to work for you stay to work with you for a long period of time because the conditions are good, the pay is probably better than average in the local area. So you are living embodiment of what the Minister through his department and his economic vision is wanting to deliver. You're already taking advantage of important support schemes in relation to supporting green energy, again another clear part of his pillar. So I'm just keen to understand, given that you're a model example of what the Minister wants to produce right across Northern Ireland, as previous Minister, the current Minister, been out to see is, what's your relationship with them? Have you met them yet?
Certainly the previous Minister, Mr Murphy, has been in Denroy several times and was very supportive, so we were generally pretty keen on the strategy that's there. Some of the elements of the good jobs, well, let's call it good jobs bill, are a bit worrying, but I'm sure you're hearing that from all sectors. Would like to see that kept under control. As I said earlier, it's support for INI as well is key. We welcome a lot of changes in INI. We're hoping to see a simplification. INI can be bureaucratic, has been in the past. So a simplification of the processes around INI and its support, and an increased level of support, particularly around, we talked about renewable energy support. R&D as well. There's a lot of talk about R&D. The R&D tax credits dropped a few years ago, you might recall. Aerospace and defence, well, defence is a bit faster, but aerospace tends to be a bit glacier in terms of new products and technologies and so on. It's quite rightly very cautious about adapting new technologies, so that requires very long R&D programs. Typically, if we start something in R&D, it could be up to 5 years before it commercialises, you know, so R&D support along the way, and we've used I&I extensively in the past, Innovate UK and so on as well, but a recognition and support around that to make sure that the SMEs with emerging technologies are supported in that journey, because it is quite long. It doesn't commercialise quickly generally. So yeah, but generally the engagement with the Minister in the past has been very good.
Great, David.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to come to me. Thank you very much for your presentation. I suppose I have, in Lagan Valley, have Datum there, I have Northern or NI Precision, we've some, and although Talis are a major employer in East Belfast, we have a lot of my constituents would actually work there and right across. So thank you all for that work. I kind of come from sort of Quaker roots, where I if you're looking at the defence, but I always sort of veer for peace and reconciliation, but equally appreciate that we have to have a defence. So that is absolutely vital as well. So thank you and congratulations on the announcement this week. One of the things for me that I've raised recently, and you're the absolute embodiment of this, is what I don't see as so we've got a 4-stranded direction for regional balance, decarbonisation, and I'm totally agreeing to those. But we don't have a manufacturing strategy or an advance. And if we look at going forward, if you look at the South, they have a manufacturing strategy that delivers regional balance. So 85% of jobs in the South are outside of Dublin. Whereas would that, so it's like a non-focus of the department on the actual industry, and you're part of that would actually help grow the GDP of Northern Ireland. Would that, do we need a focus from within the department to go, this is, advanced manufacturing, this is something we're really strong at, an innovation historically. Do we need something down with an actual focus to drive this, to allow you to double your growth index, or quadruple it was actually in years?
Absolutely. That's what we're here to ask for. Really to say, look, we probably in the last 10 years, in the absence of an executive, we actually put together a strategy, not a manufacturer. So we put together a strategy. It was endorsed by the Economy Minister at the time. We got support from Invest Northern Ireland. But really what we're saying is we're now working on the next 10 years. And we want full support of the executive, of the government, to say, look, this is a jewel in the crown for Northern Ireland. Let's all of us be aware of that jewel, but also let's all work together to make that extra special. So really, as we work on the next version of this manufacturing strategy for Northern Ireland, we're asking for a call. Let's be joined up on it.
Yeah, the department needs to be, and it's brilliant. It's coming from the grassroots and coming up. But it's that is without that, is there a barrier to that growth? And I'll not hold this because I know we're running out of time. But is there a barrier to you delivering that, or seeing the growth right across without that strategic direction from here?
I think there's just so much more we can do if we're all joined up.
Brilliant. Thank you. I don't want to.
David, no, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was very, very interesting. It's wonderful to see the array of businesses that are benefiting from this cluster, and it's been hugely successful. Must say, Leslie, really impressed with how you've profiled the industry over this past few years. Like I was recently at the Space Conference in Belfast, and I just couldn't believe the scale of ambition that there is in Northern Ireland, and it's so exciting to see. Largely agree, Kevin, with your assessment on particularly cost of doing business. It's not getting any easier. Nope. In fact, the Chancellor's budget, in my view, is counterproductive to the very ambition of growth.
Great.
And ultimately what we're seeing is this push now towards automation. And in many ways, I can see why companies such as yourself have to go down that way, because, the challenges and complexities of managing a workforce and overheads, when you see something like $750,000 a year, it can only go one place, and that's directly onto the consumer. Right. So I suppose probably in looking forward, and I'm really interested to see, because as I've got more involved to understand some of your companies, and some of them are pillar companies for Northern Ireland, think of Collins or Aerospace, for example, the huge ecosystem of companies that are involved with them, the SMEs, 1 and 2, sometimes 5 employees, and that is regionally balanced. That's in rural communities right across Northern Ireland. What has been your experience of Invest NI's desire and ability to help those SMEs become match fit to be able to benefit from an order such as Thales, or indeed enter the ecosystem for Collins Aerospace, Denry, wherever it may be? I'm very interested to hear that, because quite often we always hear the charge being placed against Invest NI in a legacy term that for many small and medium-sized enterprises and new starts, it's almost impossible to get the help that they need to be able to contribute to your wider ecosystem. Happy forever.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start and maybe hand over to Kevin as an SME, but really, when we launched this strategy for Northern Ireland, we had a very good partnership with Invest Northern Ireland. We really did a good aerospace team, very good aerospace team. We worked together on many things. We had 6 working groups that Invest Northern Ireland were part of. So look, this 10-year plan was actually 10 years of hard work, and Invest Northern Ireland were part of that. And I will say they do help us with a business excellence program. Why is Northern Ireland so good at business excellence? Because Invest Northern Ireland was part of that grouping. So yes, very positively. We worked together on going on trade missions together. Let's go sell Northern Ireland, very positively. I think recently we've lost a lot of the aerospace team, and there is a major changes. So we want to get back to that point of where we've a full team of Invest Northern Ireland fully focused on the sector. But Kevin, if you want to share.
Yeah, I completely endorse what Leslie said. Generally, my view of INI is very positive. The trade missions and so on are excellent. They run at Farnborough, for example. They'll run a coordinated stand with all the Northern Ireland companies. Maybe, I don't know if any of you have been, you should go to Farnborough or DSEI even this autumn and have a look. It makes those trade missions very easy. But in terms of an SME experience, it's become increasingly difficult to get funding support, I suppose, over the years. And you go way back years ago, you had the capital grants, and I'll understand they're long gone. But even things, I'll give you an example, training grants, they're extremely hard to get. It's very bureaucratic and cumbersome to claim them. And then if you claim for a certain training program, you can only do it once. So 5 years down the line, you've got a bunch of new starts who want the same training. Sorry, we funded that before, we're not doing it again. So we haven't actually claimed any training grants in a number of years because we've exhausted, because you do tend to repeat what you do, with new starts coming in. So that hasn't been ideal. The R&D support is still there, but it's increasingly difficult to get. A major issue I have, and it'll be not uncommon to other SMEs, is I have legacy employment grant, effectively letters of offers, this selective financial assistance I call it. And they were based on manning and, let's say, work processes at that time. Through automation, our employment has been falling. So I'm left with legacy SFA letters for targets of employment. And really, I should not be, if there still are, they should not be giving out the SFA grants contingent on employment. It should be on productivity. Yes. It should be on productivity metrics. So, and in fact, there's probably an argument to go back and revisit a lot of those. I'm not pleading my case, but I think a lot of SMEs will be in the same boat where they have legacy letters of offer that they're potentially having a clawback situation because they didn't create jobs because it was necessity through employment costs to buy robots and not employ people.
And I know we are tight for time, so look, I appreciate that. It's a very interesting subject. Just on brief to yourself, Nigel, so obviously good news in terms of the order for Thales. Leslie had mentioned earlier how difficult it is in sometimes some of our supply chain dealing with MOD contracts given the sensitivities. What good news is there for the supply chain and the ecosystem for Northern Ireland in relation to this particular order and their ability to be able to access some of the benefits that may come from a huge order such as this from MOD?
Yeah, so absolutely. So a couple of things. I would kind of echo the challenges that a lot of the SMEs will face with dealing directly with the MOD. I think that's two-tier. A lot of R&D, research and development, and early life cycle projects actually get released through primes like us because the MOD tends to think of full systems. So often it's the responsibility of primes to be able to pass that through to SMEs. Fine, we absolutely understand that. part of the challenge, actually, even as a prime, has been an incredible lack of funding for early life cycle research and development and research and technology funding flowing through from the MOD. Okay, and this comes down to many reasons behind it, but I guess I would characterise it as two things. There's lack of funding, obviously, just pure lack of funding as defence budgets become increasingly tight, subject to very, very recent announcements. Also, actually, it's a prioritisation issue because of large major contracts and a requirement to issue product now and manufacture product now, existing product now, and issue it to front lines. It means that we often forget about the future skills piece. That's super important to both us as a prime, but also actually as we pass that through on to SMEs. On your other point on what does a significant order like the one we announced at the weekend mean for SMEs, it's great news for SMEs across Northern Ireland, across the UK. The vast majority of our supply chain is UK based, and a very significant slice of that stays in Northern Ireland, so that's great news for the local and UK economy. Okay.
Thank you. Finally, Diana.
Thank you to the panel. It's been a very interesting morning, and you're very welcome here today. I think you just asked Gary, David has asked my question there about strategies.
Remembered it this week.
I remembered your this week. The strategies to support Indigenous businesses, and I represent Fermanagh South Tyrone, and I'm pleased to see Cooning Textiles are contributing to the industry significantly. I'd like to see more in the supply chain coming to that area. I'm curious to know as well gender balance within the industry, what you're doing at higher skilled levels to promote and attract women into the industry.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, look, great to have. We've quite a number of companies in Fermanagh and Tyrone area. So, Cooning doing a great job in the defence industry. Recently, Elite Electronics has also joined us, which is great. In terms of gender balance, my own organisation, ADS, is I think we're more women than men actually in our organisation, which is amazing. But generally, we've a great focus. We've got a programme called Women in Defence, and we've got another programme called Women in Aerospace, and actually this week is Women in Industry Day. So we actually do support, there's a Women in Defence programme we're trying to push across the industry. This month we're running a schools engagement programme for young people, and it's great to have young girls coming to participate. It's a schools programme with two major programmes to develop the next generation. We've got the Schools Rocketry Challenge, which will happen on the 21st of March at RLC Langford Lodge, where the young people have to launch an egg 800 feet and land it without breaking it. It'll hopefully be on the evening news, but mostly young girls participating, which is great. And then we've got a Schools Build a Plane project with young ladies. So we really want to encourage young ladies to join the industry.
Another just totally unrelated question is, in terms of energy outputs for your industry, do you have sufficient grid capacity? Do you have issues with that at all?
I know that certain companies, they're upping their demand for electricity, new machinery. The biggest issue I've heard of is the connecting costs. No, Kevin has mentioned the on-running high cost of energy, but actually if they're in a remote location, the connection cost is really, really exorbitant.
Another point that I've come across in my locality is the time it takes to get the quotation through has been 2 years.
Yes.
And that's significant for investment and for progress. Yes.
We had an extension was sitting empty for 6 months waiting for a grid connection. That's just a banger. It wasn't even a remote area.
Yeah. People in Belfast might think Bangor's remote. And then I'm very sorry, just our agriculture colleagues are joining us 10 minutes ago, and we have another meeting, and they probably have farm-related activities to do later today. So thank you so much. From my perspective, you have my full support. I'm a member of the all-party group on aerospace and defence, and I'll continue to champion your cause. You're key to growing the Northern Ireland economy and providing jobs to all communities in all parts of Northern Ireland. So as long as I'm chair of this committee, you'll have my full support.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
So members, are you content then to write to the department just asking them about the if I've understood correctly, there is no high-value manufacturing catapult centre in Northern Ireland. Just that's what their plans are in that regard. There are also some commentary we could seek around QUB's underwriting of the AMME centre, and also just seek commentary on the Invest NI legacy employment targets, if members are keen to do that.
Agreed.
Fine.
Anybody, anything else?
And then just obviously the visit that was suggested.
Yeah, okay, so visit to Kilkeel, if that's agreed. Members, we'll do it sometime.
We also note the grid connectivity
Please.
issue that it's recurring. It's something that is coming up.
The damage that it's having to investments, we may wish to write to our colleagues in the FI committee.
Right across everything, though. It's everything.
Yep.
It's right across all industries. Yes.
Okay, content?
Yeah.
Okay, correspondence, item 8, members content to dispose of those as per the index?
Yes.
Okay, forward work plan, Peter?
So members, quick one, the House of Commons Business and Trade Committee, they were going to be seeing us shortly. That's been cancelled, they've other plans. Also just our Maze Lawn Cash programme for next week will actually be quite short. It'll just be the Maze Lawn Cash Development Board, as the department has declined to come and brief on the other thing that we were going to, it wasn't related to Maze Lawn Cash particularly, but
what was it we had requested?
The charges, and then they're not coming.
What had we requested?
I think this was about, was it about... It was OREAP, yes. It was, but no, we're scheduling that in for another one. So this is the Offshore Renewable Energy Action Plan.
Okay.
Consultation was launched on the 27th of February.
Yeah.
So we asked for that. Also, on the 14th of May, we're going to have our joint concurrent with education, all about careers and stuff like that. The Minister of Education has indicated he won't be attending, so therefore the Minister for Economy won't come either, but we will have the officials if members are content with that. That's great.
Okay. So if next week, if we have some space, then can we request that the department come and brief in relation to their ongoing work with the utility regulator and NIE about compensation, because we think we need to bottom this out one way or another. If it's not happening, the public needs to be told.
So we try and have that for next week then.
100%.
Yep,
Okay.
great.
Any other business members? Okay, if none, then we will adjourn, and then we will meet as a committee next week, and then we'll start our joint concurrent meeting with our colleagues from the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs.
Okay, so if we go into adjourn, members, and we'll restart very shortly. Do you want to take a quick break?
Go and grab
We'll-
tea.
Senate Chamber. Sound